The history of Cardano and us, its community, has been a little like a bunch of people standing in front of a tree waiting for it to bloom. We had reason to think it was going to bloom. We had been told it was going to bloom, and most of us actually believed we would see those blossoms. Then we waited. We waited and waited. Byron, Shelley, Mary, Allegra, and Alonzo Hard Fork Combinator events all came and went. The tree was surely growing, but the flowers did not appear. Fast forward to July 2022, and now Vasil is coming, and after it, a wholesale transformation in governance. We've waited and paid our dues. It's finally time to see Cardano in full bloom. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to discuss the June Cardano 360, the new whiteboard video from Charles on the roadmap and governance, and a $2 billion hole in a crypto lender. If you're like me and you have no idea if these are actually cherry trees or some completely separate type of blossoming fruit tree, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the army of spies stake pool, ticker AOS. The June Cardano 360 dropped today. It sounds like the Cardano booth was the most hyped and lively booth at Consensys. Tim Harrison says they had about 25 Cardano projects at the booth with them at various points. We also learned about the EVM sidechain and other sidechains to come from Catherine Stacy. The bridges connecting mainnet to these sidechains will be permissionless as to the validators. And there was mention of possible sidechains for decentralized AI, identity, governance, and even metaverse projects. IOG is open sourcing the EVM code. They're also giving selected projects access to the EVM sidechain alpha. Next, we heard from Stella Ivanova of IOG, who told us about Lace. And it was characterized more as a Web3 portal, as a gateway to things like sidechains, governance, and identity, and not just as a wallet. Charles also talked about frictionless sign up for things requiring identity and asked people to imagine a one-click sign up for Coinbase with no KYC because Lace already contained your decentralized identifier. We also saw highlights from the Audit Summit they held in Barcelona, and it was very comforting to see how much time and energy Cardano was putting into the audit and certification process. We also got a quick update from Nigel. Today was just a double H instead of a triple H, but we found out the testnet will fork on Sunday, July 3rd. Duncan Coots gave us some information on diffusion pipelining. He said it's basically an overlapping of processing and propagation. Diffusion pipelining will let us increase script execution units, which will increase block sizes, number of scripts per block, and how long scripts can run without blowing the diffusion budget. Once again, we have a 5-second budget for propagation or diffusion. This is called the delta parameter. We currently use 1 to 2 seconds. So Duncan says we could go up to, say, 3 or 4 seconds and use the bigger blocks with more scripts that run longer. Duncan is also working on Ouroboros Laos, which is Ouroboros with input endorsers. You'll remember that input endorsers are projected to take us to very high throughput. It sounds like input endorsers are really still at that research stage, but that diffusion pipelining will get us to where we need to be for now. You'll remember from past coverage that input endorsers has really been described as kind of an end game as far as getting us to those really, really high throughput levels. Next, we heard from projects, including D Quadrant, the team behind the Artano NFT marketplace, and Ronald Spahn, the CEO of D Quadrant, reported that moving their dApp to the new dev testnet containing all the Vasil upgrades to Plutus, which is kind of being called Plutus 2.0, including SIPs 31 through 33, inline datums, reference inputs, and reference scripts, resulted in 10x better performance of their dApp. And we found out from Tim Harrison that IOG and Artano have been working pretty closely together over this period. Next, we heard from Eric Coley of Indigo Synthetic Asset Platform. It sounds like Indigo has been busy on the dev testnet. Eric said they're looking forward to reference inputs the most so that their contracts can read Oracle price data without actually consuming a UTXO. He said reference scripts will also help reduce transaction fees for users. And he mentioned that they will be the biggest consumer of data from the Charlie 3 Oracle on Cardano. Next up, we heard from Sebastian of IOG, who's got some nice bottles of whiskey up on top of his piano there. And he reminded us that Hydra is also a DApp. And we learned that the Vasil upgrades will take them from 60 UTXOs in a single Hydra head transaction to 300. So currently, they're doing something like 60 UTXOs in a single transaction. And the Vasil upgrades will take them to 300 UTXOs per transaction. It turns out that the Hydra team were the proposers of SIP42, which will allow for better serialization of data on chain. And right now, they're kicking off the external audit of Hydra. But we didn't just get a Cardano 360. We got one of those big Charles whiteboard videos. And this one felt like one of those big pivotal moments. In fact, it felt like he was sort of cresting the summit. Like he kind of knew he was about to achieve the big significant chunk of the goals he set out to achieve, and he's kind of letting us know what it's going to look like as we come over the summit and we can see down into the next valley, see what's going on after Fossil, and what's going to be happening in Cardano, what he's going to be up to, all of those kind of things. But this definitely felt like one of those transitional moments where he's letting us know, hey, we're actually moving from one part of the life of Cardano into another part of the life of Cardano, and some pretty big things are going to change, but it's all hopefully going to be for the better. So he said there's going to be 4 big dev tracks happening after Vasil. Number 1 would be Shelley cleanup, and they'd be working on things like partial delegation, proxy keys, peer-to-peer, things we've heard a lot about in the past, but they couldn't quite get done because there were bigger priorities out there. He said he hasn't forgotten about those, and these are things he's been talking about a lot, but they just haven't been able to get to them. The next track is going to be Goguen cleanup, and Vasil was the first of this, but they've got some more things to do, like better Plutus application backend documentation and more syntactic sugar for the developers. Number 3 track is Basho, of course, and this will be a lot of sidechain stuff, Mithril, and input endorsers. Number 4 is Voltaire. And it turns out that the Voltaire part of this, the governance part, would take up a lot of this video and represent some of the biggest changes I think we've seen in Cardano in a long time. So he said that the voting center and DREPs will lead to a surge in voting in Catalyst, and they're going to link Catalyst to the mainnet via some of the development in Basho. Then there's protocol governance. What bureaucracy is going to govern hard forks, SIPs, and parameter changes? Charles wants to move from the tripartite structure of the Cardano Foundation, Emergo, and IOHK with a merit-based, member-based organization. I know, that's going to require some explaining this merit-based, member-based organization. So you'll remember in past episodes, we've talked about Dirk Hondel. He's the guy that they hired from the Linux Foundation. And we talked about him when he first got hired, and also in the context of that fireside chat he had with Linus Torvalds when Cardano became a gold member of the Linux Foundation. So between IOG and the Cardano Foundation, they've spun out something like 50 people who are being led by Dirk Hondel, and they've been working on this merit-based, member-based organization since February. We'll hear an announcement with specifics on this in September, and Charles was a little cagey about what event in September he'd be announcing this at. And I'm not sure if this is like going to be some kind of a Cardano Summit or what it's going to be. Definitely September would fit the timeline for last year's Cardano Summit, but there'll be some kind of an event involving the Cardano Foundation where we'll get some kind of an announcement about this, but he was able to tell us there will be a governance steering committee, a technical steering committee, other committees on things like growth and adoption, and a SIP committee, a Cardano Improvement Proposal Committee. And this bureaucracy, and we're using the word bureaucracy here in sort of the broad sense that governments have to, exercise certain functions, and the organs within the government that execute those functions we can call a bureaucracy, but not in the pejorative we hate bureaucracy sense, just in the sense that there are these parts of the government that have to do these things. We're going to call this the bureaucracy of Cardano. So this bureaucracy, all these committees will make proposals, and the ADA holders will vote on those proposals. So this is kind of a bicameral system, not bicameral in the sense of like the US Senate and US House of Representatives, where both houses are voting in different ways and different proportions of representation, that kind of thing. But in the sense that the bureaucracy, all these committees, will be coming up with the proposals, writing the proposals, proposing them to all of us ADA holders, and then us ADA holders will be either approving or disapproving these proposals. So the founding three entities of Cardano, Emergo, the Cardano Foundation, and IOHK, have the keys to update the protocol. Going forward, the SIP committee would have what Charles described as M of N keys and be able to sign for updates to the protocol on approval of the ADA holders. Obviously, we've heard some grumbling over the years from Cardano critics who said, hey, how decentralized can you really claim to be if IOHK is in charge of the vast majority of the development, and IOHK decides when to trigger hard forks, and there's no voting on these protocol updates by the community? This would change all that. So the bureaucracy, including the SIP committee, would be coming up with all of the different protocol updates that might be necessary. We would vote on them as ADA holders, and then the SIP committee would have the keys to actually trigger those updates to the protocol. So on the merit part of the merit-based, member-based organization, merit means, in Charles' description, that you either contribute funding or you contribute work to Cardano. So the work part would possibly include DREPs, stake pool operators, dApp developers, along with people taking a community role. So you've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 stake pool operators, maybe 1,000 dApp developers, and a bunch of DREPs. And there will be a bunch of committees in this bureaucracy, and these parties could populate those committees. They also need more people working directly for the blockchain, including, in Charles' mind, 3 to 5 more SIP editors. You might know that Sebastian of DC Spark is currently one SIP editor, and he thinks they need another 10 to 15 full-time engineers working directly for the blockchain. He thinks this will happen in Fund 10 before the end of the year. And Charles pointed out this is a fundamentally different structure than the old tripartite structure. Charles says he's going to let the dApp developers do their thing, build out projects, and he's eventually going to move on to working on RealFi. He said he needed the foundation to actually make RealFi work, but his dream, his life work is going to be RealFi, creating this more equal economic playing field for the entire world. And once Cardano is kind of in a good enough position that it can sort of, do its own thing, Charles is going to move on to RealFi. This is not a small change. This is a pretty huge change, but it kind of makes sense. I think we kind of always expected that Charles wouldn't just kind of like hang up the spurs and say, okay, Cardano's in a good enough place. I'm done now. I'm retired. I'm just going to hang out on my ranch and do nothing. Instead, he's actually doing what he claimed he was always trying to do. He always sort of made the case that the reason we build out these blockchains and the reason we build out Cardano to be the best possible blockchain is so that we can actually have an impact on the world and create, better opportunities, at least for all the people of the world who, until now maybe didn't have the same opportunities that the developed world has. So it's kind of comforting to me that Charles isn't just going to build Cardano, put governance in the hands of the community and just sort of, wash his hands of it. He's actually planning to do exactly what you'd expect, and that's use the Cardano blockchain to go out and do the RealFi stuff he's been talking about all along. Charles also talked about the Edinburgh Decentralization Index. So IOG is going to be helping to fund a lab at the University of Edinburgh, and they'll create this Edinburgh Decentralization Index of cryptocurrencies. He says first they're sort of going to benchmark Bitcoin, then they'll move on to Ethereum, then on to Cardano, and then move on to other cryptocurrencies. And of course, Charles and Cardano, no fools. It looks like they've got it all lined up so that they get this whole community governance thing up and running, on a timeline that'll have it in place for the Edinburgh Decentralization Index. I think given this was sort of like the last, big vestige of centralization. The fact that IOHK was running the development and IOHK was triggering the hard fork combinator events. Given that that's going to go away, that's going to be decentralized, man, it's pretty hard for me to come up with any kind of case that these blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum could possibly have a better score on this Edinburgh Decentralization Index than Cardano, not even addressing some of the highly centralized blockchains that we've come to call Solunavaxes in some cases. Finally, in the same video, Charles pointed out that Cardano has actually been kind of lucky in that it took us much longer to roll out DeFi because we sort of missed all of the economic carnage involved in this cycle. And here in this article, we're seeing maybe one of the worst examples of that. This is an article in the block that says FTX walked away from a deal with Celsius after seeing the state of its finances, according to sources. So, according to one source, when FTX looked at Celsius's books, Celsius had a $2 billion hole in its balance sheet, and two sources told the block that that's when FTX walked away from the deal. That's $2 billion with a B. This is one company. Celsius is one company, and they, according to this article and this source, they had a $2 billion shortfall in their balance sheet. That is no kind of small amount of money. This is just one company. You can imagine, like, people have been talking about how the contagion might spread, but if you've got one company with a $2 billion hole in its balance sheet, I don't think we yet know how deep this rabbit hole is going to go. Because if a company as big and as well known and well connected as Celsius is short that much money, I think we're going to see a lot of companies at the end of the day. A lot of companies are also going to be short. Maybe not this much, but maybe more, maybe less. But I think before the tide is totally done rolling out, I think we're going to discover a lot of things about a lot of companies that seemed very safe and secure just a few months ago. I hope you had a great week. In the US, this weekend is the big 4th of July holiday. If you're in the US and you celebrate the 4th of July, I hope you go to some kind of fantastic picnic with the fireworks, the parades, all that kind of stuff. If you're in the rest of the world, I hope you have a great summer weekend, and I will see you soon.